Hi, and welcome to Titanic Talkline. I am Alexia, and this week I am joined by Steve Proto. And if that name isn't familiar, then I think Titanic Lifebelts might be slightly more familiar to you. Hello.
Hi.
How's it going in the grand staircase?
That's going all right. It's kind of cold here. It's actually 20 degrees outside. It was 60 yesterday, but
Where
not
are you?
too. Oklahoma,
Is
Oklahoma
it
City.
is it snowing?
It might be sort of sleeting.
So I know that there's certain parts of the country right now that are getting a lot of winter weather, but
Yeah, it's definitely cold here. They'll
yeah,
close school for any reason.
really?
Yeah. Uh, they closed school the other day and for our youngest and our oldest, and it's just there was not the ground was completely dry.
It's like
Just
preemptive.
fear.
Eh,
Yeah, basically.
That's neat. I can get that though because I grew up in a far more like removed area in Maryland. So where some of my friends in the same county would have their roads plowed, they wouldn't have even gotten to us by then. So it's I can see where they're cautious if it's a big county, but I mean, you know better than I do. Maybe there was no risk at all.
Well, I grew up in New York and they never closed school. They
Yeah,
just
yeah.
expected you to be there.
In New York, it was like, oh, there's a snowbank, go through it. So I usually start off by asking everyone the same question, or when I remember, and I have remembered this time. So I'm going to ask you, what is your personal Titanic story before we get into the lifebelts and all that? But how did you come around to Titanic just sort of in the first place?
Well, I've always been interested in the Titanic. In middle school, I'd just take books out of the library and, read about them. I did, the Estes model of the Titanic, and I did a whole sinking into like a shadow box background, like for a project. And
That's really cool.
then while I have Yeah, it was really neat because I just put, a bunch of pinholes in the background. There was a light in the back. So I'm just very hands-on and very wanting to make things.
Mhm.
So then have kids and, they watch YouTube. They see these videos, they hear Titanic and they just watch, they go down the rabbit hole of that and then I get drawn back into it. So I'm kind of following them and their passion for the Titanic as well.
Mhm.
So we've been to the Titanic Museum with our oldest when he was younger, and we just got back with our youngest from the Titanic Museum, and they're just enthralled in it.
Is that the one in Branson? I don't know geography well
Yeah,
enough.
that's the closest one. It's about
Mhm.
5 hours away,
Okay.
so it's really easy to get to.
Yeah, I lived in Maryland and it was like 7 hours to get to the Pigeon Forge one. So it's kind of the same thing. It's like you do a 2 day trip out there and it's nice.
Yeah. I remember my father, he said his teacher was on the Titanic. And I'm just like, what? he, he was on the Titanic? It's like,
Mhm.
yeah, he was Marshall Drew. He was a second class passenger.
Huh.
And he was
Wow.
8 years old when he was on there. And he would talk about it in class. He was a drafting teacher, so he taught
Mhm.
art, photography,
Okay.
and yeah, that's kind of my dad brought me into it a little bit with that information.
I can see that. That is pretty incredible, especially when you get into the Titanic community, you start, meeting people and talking to people. There's a lot of people who have these connections, and I think it's really cool. So,
Yeah,
when did you decide you were going to make a life belt? And why a life belt? I know that it seems like a silly question, but like, there's people who make replicas of a lot of things. People make replica china, people have made replicas of the bronze boy and stuff, but why life belts?
well, there. There's a lot of research that went into him,
Sure.
and we were actually at the Titanic Museum. And I saw a little kid, and then he had like this pillowcase with foam in it, and he was dressed up, and I was like, you know what, I gotta make one of those for my son. So I did all this research and I got these measurements and I made one and it didn't turn out very well and it was way too big for him. So I was like, I could start all over. So I'm gonna size this down to fit him and made it. They're about what is it? 11 inches, 4 inches wide,
Hmm.
um, like about 8 inches wide, 11 inches tall, just the blocks of cork for the kid.
Okay.
And it looked perfect on him. So then I made about five.
Hmm.
So I remade one for my oldest son, then I made another one for me, and I made another one for my brother, and I'm like, okay, this is getting a little bit, more and more accurate. And
Right.
then my wife's like, oh, you should, people might be interested in these and for their Titanic collections. So that's kind of how it all came about. My wife jokes I just woke up one morning and said, we're gonna make Titanic Lifebelts. She's like, okay.
That's not a bad project though. I think that's really cool. And I've seen one of yours in person. We were talking slightly off air about the guy who brought his to the Titanic convention, and he wore it one of the days, and it was really cool to see it in person because you see most of the older ones. They've been a not been aged. They are aged, and they've been through the ringer, many of them, and then you see them behind glass, and it's kind of cool to have one in front of you that you can actually touch and really see.
Oh yeah, and I try to make them as accurately as possible. There's a lot of measurements that go into like the cork size and type of fabric, obviously, and then
Mhm.
how it was actually constructed, how it's all the cork is side loaded and it's hand stitched, and how far apart each stitching is, and if the thread's doubled up or if it's not. So, a lot of people have helped me along the way,
Mhm.
so that's how they're as accurate as they were.
Have you been able to see any of the actual authentic Titanic life jackets in person? Have you
Just
any of the
just going
museums?
to the Branson Museum. They have Ken Marshall's half belt there, which a lot of the stamps are modeled after that one. Ken,
Hmm.
uh, Ken sent me the proofs for the stamps that he had a replica made, so that actually helped a lot in getting the stamps to match so closely to
Hmm.
what the originals were.
Where else did you do your research? Because I hadn't thought of things like how did you really start to notice those differences, things like double stitching, double threading, where it's knotted. How did you figure out that it was, the cork was side loaded? I would have personally assumed, knowing nothing, if I were to make a lifeboat today, I would have guessed that you like lay it down flat, you put the cork in, then you kind of stitch over and around. But now that I'm thinking about it, that seems extremely impractical.
Yeah, with the way the sewing machine is, everything's assembled before the cork is actually put in.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at a lot of photographs, and there's some photographs that are genuine life belts. Either so, you have to figure out what's real and what's not.
Right.
And Jerry Vondeling, he has articles about the Fosbury life belts, and he goes into great detail about the size of the cork and everything like that. So that's where I draw most of the information I have to recreate them. But this is a kind of a longer story, but it's pretty
Love a
interesting.
longer story.
Okay. So I was making these life belts based on these measurements that Jerry had, and Jerry got them as well from similar sources that I've seen from other curators at other museums. So I made them by those dimensions at the very beginning. And then I got a message from a person on Etsy. And they said, oh, my high school friend is a curator at the Merseyside Museum in the UK, and she has access to a life belt, and she could take all these measurements for me. Can you make some minor adjustments to like the cork size and the fabric and the type of stitching and everything like that? I was like, okay, what does she have? So, she sent me all the information. And she also had a friend who had a Fosbury life belt. So she can actually see that one. And her friend took measurements and they were the same. So this is two for two, both Fosbury life belts. One is believed to be at the time from the Arabic. So I went ahead and, made those minor changes. and sold one to her. She took pictures of it next to the life belt of her friend. So we got some really good side by side shots, and it's really close. One's 111 years old, one's brand new, pretty much.
Right.
But I told Jerry, hey, I got these measurements. They're a little bit different than yours. And this person has an actual phosphorate life belt. And this
Hmm.
is where he's gets all excited. And he's like, well, can you send me pictures? So I sent him some pictures and he's like, oh, can I get her name and get this guy's name? I was like, well, let me pass your information along to them and have them contact you. And they did. And they took some really detailed photos of the life belt that he had in his possession.
Hmm.
And Jerry sent them on to Ken Marshall.
Hmm.
And Ken Marshall noticed that there was some writing on the life belt. SOS, saved April 15th. So, or April 14th. So they passed all that along and found out that that life belt was signed by several other people that
Wow.
were in lifeboat number one. So he didn't actually have an SS Arabic life belt. He had a Titanic life belt. And it's believed it's owned by Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon.
That's incredible when you start looking at. I learned a new word recently. I think it's personage, the patronage, or what is it? The history of an artifact. When you actually start tracing it back, learning its histories and learning its stories, you can really find out cool facts. Like that's really neat.
Yeah, I didn't think that nobody thought that they'd be finding another life belt. There were 13 out there at the time.
Something
Now
like that.
there's, 14.
That's pretty. It's just really interesting where stuff ends up turning up. And like you were saying, in this guy's case, he thought he just had something else. And like, if somebody gave me a cup, for example, and said, "This is from the Queen Mary," I don't think I'd question it too much. Oh, thank you. How very neat. This is quite cool. And, I don't think that I'd really examine it in that way and be like, are you sure it's from there? What about this other ship? Because the pattern and I don't know that I'd question it unless somebody else came at me in this way with hard evidence, like, hey, I've noticed this thing and I traced it back and I have proof that it's actually from, oh man, I've just forgotten the name of every ship I've ever learned. The Lusitania.
Mhm.
Unlikely, but still, it's kind of one of those things where I wouldn't have questioned it. If someone told me that my life thought was from, the Arabic, I'd be like, oh, how cool. I don't know that I'd be like, are you sure it's not from the Titanic? I'm sure.
Yeah, there's several life belts, and the Titanic community. If it's not traced back to a particular person
Mm-hmm.
who was either on the Mackie Bennett or the Carpathia or the Titanic, you know, itself, then they just dismiss it as being actually a Titanic lifebelt. There's only two. One, the Madeline Astor lifebelt, that could be traced back. Mabel Francitelli's lifebelt, that could be traced back to her. The Frank Blackmar lifebelt,
Mm-hmm.
that was, taken aboard the Carpathia. So, and the Ernest St. Clair, the waiter on the Carpathia, recovered it. It's not
Mm-hmm.
tied back to a person, but it is, tied back to the ship.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the questionable life belts that are, oh, they're believed definitely be phosphorated life belts, but their ties to the Titanic are definitely looser.
Mm-hmm.
James Dunbar, he found a life belt on a beach cleaning
Right.
up wreckage that came ashore. There's no certainty, but
Could be.
it's still a good piece of history, and it
Yeah.
very well could be from the Titanic.
Still 111-year-old ish life belt.
Hmm.
I've seen Madeline Astor's life belt in person. I've talked about it a few times on the show, but
Hmm.
it was really cool. And I think I've mentioned it on the show before that I hadn't seen a life belt in person and I was surprised by how small it was. I, for some
Yes,
reason, expected them to be bigger.
probably due to the Titanic movies where they're
Yeah.
grander and much bigger and have a bigger screen presence than
They kind
just
of
something that.
they resemble more like contemporary life belts in that way, and that they're kind of like they seem puffy, a little fluffy.
Yeah, they're very heavy.
Yeah, they were heavy and stiff. That surprised me. Like I poked at the cork and again, I was expecting it to give a little. I don't know why. I was expecting it to give a little, and then it absolutely did not. It was like poking a textbook.
And they're very thick.
Yes, because the material it's canvas. Is it? Is it?
It's it's linen,
It's linen. That's very rough linen.
and yeah, it. I won't go into like thread counts and warp and weft or anything, but
Why you
it's
can?
linen.
Oh,
The um the ones I make are canvas just due to the affordability
sure.
and the availability of it. If I
Hmm.
was to make them out of linen, the prices of them would just be cost prohibitive for most people
That's
just to buy
fair.
them. I'd like to get these, produce them and get them into the hands of people who really want them,
Hmm.
without, breaking the bank.
Right. I think I was mostly just marveling about. Again, I thought it would have more give. I thought it would be softer. I don't know why I thought these things, but I was surprised by its roughness. And I'm surprised to
Mhm.
learn that the originals, especially because again, it's old, that it's linen. That seems like it would be very delicate, unless I don't know anything about linen and its longevity. But it's not what I would pick to make, a protective garment.
I think it's what they had available at the time
Okay,
that
that's fair.
would have lasted.
Also
And
fair.
I think it's more durable and stronger. And I guess it's supporting the weight of itself. Because a
That's
lot
true.
of these life belts on display, it's not how I would display. They're great to view in that position, but really it'd be really hard on the fabric to have it displayed standing up or hanging on the straps, the original straps themselves.
I actually learned how they display those at the
Yeah.
convention. Yeah, I think that this would actually be kind of interesting. So, because I wondered the same thing, because in the same way that you hang up your garments in the closet, you put something on a hanger, all the weight's on the shoulders of the straps. And I had that same thought too. You hang this thing up on anything, it's 100+ year old fabric holding up weight. It just seems really unfair. But what he showed us they had done were these custom PVC sort of displays that had little rows built into them for the corrugated cork, so that the each section of cork basically had its own little shelf holding it up on the stand. And it did have, shoulder supports that they can widen, shorten depending on whose life belt it is. But by supporting all of the individual pieces of cork on these little shelves on the front and the back, it takes the weight off the straps.
That's a very good idea because
Yeah.
I
And
believe the one in the Belfast Museum is just hanging on straps and it's very taut.
yeah, I mean, even if you have, I'm thinking of clothing that I have upstairs in my closet. I have some things that are hanging by straps, and every once in a while I take them off the hangers to give the fabric a rest from the tension. Because yeah, over time it just it drags. And especially when it's got all that we were just discussing the cork, it's reasonably thick, and I mean heavier than I thought it would be. I don't it was striking how unlike it it was all sorts of things I thought it wasn't going to be. I thought it would be bigger. I thought it would have more give. I thought it would be softer. And then I looked at it and my brain kind of said, that's it. Not in an unimpressed way, but as someone's like, that's all they had? Are you kidding me? This is nuts. Like not that's it
That,
unimpressively, but like more like just gosh, that's all.
the cork itself is also very insulating, so
Is it?
it would keep you warm.
I did not know
If,
that.
if you were to even wear, one of my life belts for an extended period of time, you're just going to start sweating. You're going to get hot wearing it. So, they were bulky. They probably didn't trust them very much to save their life. But I do believe that they were very warm,
Hmm.
warm as could be, while
Right.
wearing them versus not wearing them. So,
Do they float well enough? Like if you actually were to if I were to wear one of your life belts and like jump in a pool,
Would
would it
not recommend doing that, but
I
it will
don't think
float,
that
yes.
it would float, but would it just is it just not what makes it unsafe?
Since it's only tied around your waist
Hmm.
by straps, it can move up very quickly. So
True.
if you were to jump in the water, it would pop up and hit you in the face or your jaw. Um,
You're
it is
right.
debated whether um, people were injured jumping into water with these. I believe they were. There are some people saying that there's no evidence that there were broken necks due to life belts, but yeah,
There's no
you
evidence there
definitely don't.
wasn't.
Yeah,
I
there's some
can
people that I've talked to where they're like, no, it never happened, and some people are like, it it's documented, it did.
necks
Yeah,
are
you definitely don't want to jump into water.
okay. Maybe if I don't jump into the water, if I walk into into the water, but it would float.
Oh yes,
Okay.
definitely float.
I did notice a little bit what you're talking about that it popped up in the scene in the Cameron film when they're, not swimming,
Hmm.
paddling through the corpses. Some of them you can see that the life belts have come up kind of around their chins
Oh
due to
yeah.
the flotation. And but I find it interesting that people are saying that it's like no way, no way, because necks are fragile, and that sounds like an obvious statement, but it's really true. Things like whiplash and what have you, they happen really quickly, and it doesn't take much. And a high impact jump into water that's much. That's a lot. There can be a lot of force
Hmm.
behind that. And then, as you say, you have this life vest, and if it's not moving intuitively with you, or if, as you say, it pops up as your momentum is still going strictly down, I can see where that could cause problems. It weirdly reminds me of something I was talking to a friend about because he's really into Formula One racing. And he was talking about how a lot of people didn't actually, used to die from crashes. It was the impact of the crash itself. It was because they were going fast and then suddenly they weren't. And because there was no head and neck
Hmm.
support, there'd be a lot of snap necks. Not it super unpleasant, but I can see where that would have been a concern in, as you mentioned, with the life belts popping up. And then as I was just thinking about how fast you're hitting the water.
Being on a ship,
Mm-hmm.
um, you'll look at the water. Like I don't know if you've ever been on a cruise, but you don't truly have a sense on how high you are.
No.
But you could. You're basically a 10-story building, and you're like, oh yeah, I can get down there.
Yeah, I have
No,
really. You cannot. Well, you can.
no.
It,
If you
it
land the wrong way, it would be a big problem. And you're going underwater.
it's yeah. I have poor depth perception. Like I did this to my brother the other day. I asked him how far away he thought my dog was from me, and I said he's about 6 feet away from me. And my brother looks at me like I'm nuts. He's like, that dog is 10 feet away from you, and he was right. I'm not very good at this, so I have looked over the cruise deck before, and I was on a Carnival cruise ship. These things are massive. I was pretty high up, and for the first 2 seconds before my brain truly registered, wait, how far am I? For a second, I was like, I think I could make that. I don't know why. It was a really dumb thought, but it's like, no, you can't. That's really high
Those
up.
intrusive thoughts.
Yeah, except mine are so weird sometimes. You could make that. No, you can't. That is, as you said, a 10-story jump into the water. Don't do that. I have a question for you because I've heard someone debating. This is more about just like life belts in general, and this may be something you
Hmm.
know um, just by looking into it. There are some people that argue that if you are on a sinking ship, you should not put your life belt on until you have made it off the ship. Because if you get stuck somewhere, like a room where the water is rising and you're trying to get down to the door, if you're wearing your life vest, it will prevent you from swimming down. I don't know how I feel about that as a concept, but I can see the logic behind it.
Well, yeah, if you're going to try to navigate an area of a ship that's beneath water, that's probably not the best way out. You're not going to be able to take your life belt with you anyway because it'll be buoyant. You're not
Yeah.
going to be able to force it underwater and get yourself underwater with it. That's not going to happen. You would just have to find another way to egress the ship.
Mm. The
So,
reason I think about that because, I remember doing the life belt, like the emergency drill on this cruise. And, we didn't
Mhm.
do it at the time, but one of the things they say is, if things go on, grab your life vest and put it on immediately. Make sure you have it with you. And that's always, after I heard that argument being made from somebody else, it kind of struck me a little bit. It's like I can see where, especially if you're not a great swimmer, it may not occur to you if water's rising, like to take off your life vest or anything. And I can see how that would, trap you in its own way. I don't know. Speaking of intrusive thoughts, like you could get stuck in a sinking ship if you're wearing a life vest. Obviously, I hope that most people just don't get stuck in a sinking ship.
Yeah, probably best just to, get to your muster station and see where your next step is, because sometimes, leaving the ship is might not be the best option.
That's true. Well, that's what people
Or they
thought on
might not be
Titanic.
necessary. Yeah.
That's also
Yeah, they
true.
were very reluctant to get on the ship
Hmm.
or get on the lifeboats.
Yeah. It's really interesting when you think about, if someone gives an evacuation order on a ship today, most people are immediately running for, you know, the boats and the doors. It's so interesting to think at the time how people it didn't even occur to them that Titanic might be going down. It's like, what is all this lifeboat rigmarole for? What's the point?
Yeah, and they probably didn't get a good sense of the depth of the, you know, tragedy that's about to occur,
Mm-hmm.
from where they're standing. They look off the side of the ship, they see water, they're not under the water until it was pretty much too late. Because there could, well, being on a cruise ship, you
Mm-hmm.
kind of don't have a sense of what's going on beyond
That's
what you're
true.
doing. They don't tell you everything.
It's
You
such
could
a
be
big
stopped in the
ship.
water and they just be like, "Oh, we just stopped."
Yeah, they're
Like
not
there
going to
could
come
there
telling
could
you.
be, yeah, they're only going to tell you, where they need you to be.
Well, I think it goes back to the whole we don't want to start a panic thing because
Hmm.
I don't think it's a great idea to come over the loudspeaker. Attention, Carnival Cruise members, there is an attempted mutiny in progress. Please stay calm. I don't think that would work out. So it's like I can see where there's a need for the sort of info diet to the general public when emergencies
Yeah,
happen. It's interesting to think back to Titanic, where it's like maybe if they'd been a little more honest, people might have like moved more, or but maybe they wouldn't.
yeah, they didn't have the drills like they do today.
No, but it was really interesting. Someone brought up the concept of security theater to me the other day about
Mhm.
how a lot of things, some of the procedures that we do are just to make people feel safe. Things like a lot of what the TSA is up to, which I firmly believe because my shoes are fine, man. There's nothing wrong with my shoes. Give them back. Um, but it's interesting to me because this almost seemed like the opposite of security theater, whatever was happening on the Titanic. Well, it's security theater its own way. It's like we're gonna just keep everything calm so that no one freaks out, which is like again, it's kind of I understand the logic. You don't want to start a panic, and that was the thought process the entire time. But it's just interesting, how the words and the actions are different, where it's like everything's fine, but you should really wear all of your jackets and your life vest. Don't panic though. We're all good. We're all good. Just make sure your kids are nearby. It's a really interesting dichotomy. So I,
Yeah,
I can I can see why people were kind of like, yeah, this is stupid.
we brought our life belts on our cruise with us for our Halloween cruise.
Amazing.
So we won first place.
Of course you did.
We had our youngest, Colin. He dressed as Charles Jochen, had the fake mustache, the flask, and everything. And he would just drink it, and he would tell people who he was,
That's awesome.
and they were just like, "Who's that?" A couple of people did know, but I did have my cover on, my officer cover, and my life belt, and I'm kind of walking fast because you got to get places quickly on a cruise ship, and
Right.
kind of intersected with a crew member of the ship, like one of the officers, and she got really nervous for a second. She was like, "Oh my gosh!" But she just saw me come at her wearing my life belt, walking kind of fast. I had like
In kind of an
blue
officer's
pants on.
uniform. She
Yeah, I had
probably
like
thought
my
she saw a
turtleneck.
ghost. Poor girl.
Oh my gosh.
She's she still goes around to this day telling everyone about the old naval sailor ghost she ran into on the ship. I'm a bit of an overreactor, so that would have been my first thought. Someone in period dress and a period life vest to be like, "What warning do you have?" That's really cool, though. I love the idea
Yeah,
of a whole family of life belts.
yeah, they have a grand staircase background, so yeah, we got a picture in front of that,
Love it.
and we wore it for the deck party. Just
Nice.
nobody else was dressed up like that.
What were they all dressed up as? What brilliant ideas did they have?
Um, no, just the Ninja Turtles or
Normal
they
Halloween.
they yeah, just normal Halloween stuff, Star Wars stuff.
I mean, I do like me some Star
Um,
Wars. You need to take advantage of being on the ocean, though. If you're on a cruise, like dress as a mermaid or something. I don't know. I like your idea better.
yeah, it's definitely better themed
Better
for the
theme for
cruise.
sure. Have you guys ever been to one of those like Titanic recreation dinners? I've never been to one.
No, I haven't. No, they would probably be at Pigeon Forge or Branson. They're not really in Oklahoma City.
Sorry, I needed to mute myself to sneeze, but they host those all over, like not just at the
Yeah,
museums. Like people like restaurants sometimes will do them. Like they'll just host Titanic like themed dinner. And because I think that the copies of the menu from April 14th did make it off the ship. So they'll make like that menu again, which, if I remember
yeah.
correctly, is 11 courses.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
They- they're usually very small, but very filling. And you get through
Yeah.
them all.
I've never done an 11 course dinner, but for, I think it was like my 25th or 30th birthday, one of the milestone birthdays, my mom took me to like a Michelin star restaurant. And it was that same thing where it's like six courses or something, and each dish is like the size of, I'm holding it in my hand, which is great for a podcast, but it's like a clementine or something.
Yeah, yeah. They have a chef's table on the cruise ship, and it's a
Nice.
lot of courses, and it's like a 2 hour dining, 2 or 3 hour dining experience.
I can't tell if that sounds awesome or awful.
Has a lot of wine.
Yeah, I don't drink anymore. That's just a lot of time to be sitting.
Yeah, it's in the kitchen, so you get to see, all the
That's cool.
shuffling of people around.
That is pretty cool. That's more, I get that. That's kind of an experience. I would do that. It's just so much food though. I try to think like if I were, I'm thinking right now, like if I had to make 11 courses, I've run out of at like four. I'm like, I'm done. I don't have any more ideas for dishes. I need to actually get some books out. Really think about it. That's a lot. That's just so much food.
Yeah, I definitely overcook when I make food.
Same. I'm a little better about it now. Just a little. Still pretty bad. It's like one of my favorite things to make is this pasta sauce, but you can only make it in quantity. Oh my God. So you just kind of have to make the whole thing. And then you have pasta sauce for a decade.
Yeah, I cook about 30 pounds of sauce for 12 hours. Freeze it.
Yep, nope, that makes mine sound like a reasonable amount. I bet yours is really good though. It sounds like what my mom does when she'll make like stuff where she cans, like she'll make hot sauce and candied jalapenos and just like it'll be like a massive quantity, but then as you said, you'll get like a giant
You
quantity.
get 6 months. You get
Yeah,
6 months
something.
worth of dinners.
Yeah. What do you make like a classic tomato sauce? Or do you have
Oh
meat?
yeah. No, my wife's a vegetarian, so
Oh, cool.
I cook everything separate.
Nice. I always wonder about, well, I had two, I had friends, it's like, again, same thing. It's like carnivore, well, not carnivore, omnivore, vegetarian. They would always make, so kind of annoying sometimes. They'd always make these beautiful, wholesome Instagram dishes where it's just like, I barely have the energy to cook one dish that doesn't even look good for me. Tastes fine. Like, I don't fiddle with the presentation like some people do.
Yeah, I just produce large quantities of food.
That's sometimes the best way to do things.
Yeah, it's not fancy.
But you don't need to be fancy. Like
No, I know. Yeah.
it's kind of thing like a cruise is where you get fancy and you do your 73 course dinners and stuff because you're not the one cooking. It doesn't affect you. I haven't been on a cruise in a really long time. We did a disservice, my friend and I. We went when we were broke. So we also went in an off season. So we cruised in November, so it was cold. Um, but it wasn't bad. It's just like if I had to do over again, I would make sure I had enough to actually get not an interior room because man, that is claustrophobic.
Yeah, we've always gotten balconies being on cruises.
You kind of need to. I mean, I know that sounds like I'm being a little snobby, but it's sort of like it can really get to you if you are inside like that. No view to the outside. It's a lot.
Yeah, if you sometimes I have a forward camera that if you put out that on your TV, you kind of get a sense of what's going on the outside of the ship, like if it's
Mhm.
daytime or nighttime. But some people they never go to their room. They
Yeah.
always spend it out doing things, so they're only in their room to sleep, so they're not really too worried about it. Then there's people who love to be in their room, so
Yeah.
a
We
balcony
didn't
is probably what they would prefer.
we didn't spend a lot of time in our room, so it didn't make a lot of, didn't make a lot of a difference. But when you were in there, you did get a sense of how very small that area was. That's a ship though, so it's not meant to be large.
Yeah, they're definitely trying to get as many rooms on as possible. The larger ships are more efficient
Yeah.
to run.
I don't know who it was, and it's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember for a while I was getting advertisements from some cruise company on social media about how they had like this new ship coming out. It's like the biggest one on record. I don't know how many people it can hold, but it was some ridiculous amount, like 6 to 7 thousand people.
It's a lot.
Yeah, that's just unnecessary.
Yeah, our favorite cruise ship, Carnival, like Magic, Dream, Breeze,
Hmm.
anything. I know they made the Vista, which it's it has more people, but the common areas are still the same size,
Mm,
roughly. So I just felt like there was more people on that ship. But
yeah.
yeah.
I really want to do a Virgin cruise, and that's because I'm kind of mean, and they don't let it's you have to be 18 to get on it. So I'm a big fan of that. I don't know because we did the Carnival cruise and it was and I do like that they have a lot of stuff that's specifically catered for kids because kids are part of a vacation too. But just for me personally, it would be nice to not have the concern because I the only
Oh
time
yeah,
I've ever been
I
like
understand.
serious, I've been seriously injured by children a few times. It's just a thing. One was I was snowboarding and this kid just cut in front of me and I had to bail out backwards and I got a concussion. And then at the roller skating rink, this kid cut right in front of me and I fell weird and broke my arm. So I'm like, that there's a danger. Because you have how many kids do you have? You've mentioned
Two.
two. How about how old are they? You don't have to like out their ages. Like
They're 16 and 7.
okay, so they're older. They're not quite underfoot, but I'm sure you remember the age where it's kind of like, am I about to step on a child?
Oh yeah, yeah. They're definitely they're like cats. They're just getting in front of you.
Yeah, that's a little bit. They don't chase mice as much though.
So,
So, well, actually, you're right. Kids are interesting. Oh, I did have a question about the kids' life belts.
yeah.
Because obviously, I imagine that they didn't exactly come in a bunch of sizes, but did they have children and adult life belts? Or was it one size, deal with it?
No, it was just one size.
Good God.
I haven't read anything about actual children's life belt. So
That's interesting.
I don't know what you were expected to do. Just either put an adult one because they're small, but they're a little big for maybe a 7-year old.
Right. Like, so for people at home, like, I think I'm not a huge person, I'm 5'5". I think if I were to put on one of the life belts, it would still leave quite a bit of the sides of my torso and my back exposed, as opposed to a normal life vest, normal modern ones, they kind of come all the way across the armpits. So what he's saying is like, yeah, they are smaller and that there's not quite as much bulk on the sides, but they're still not like super adjustable or anything. They're fixed size.
Yeah, you just cinch it down as best you can,
if you
and
could.
and the straps would be the only thing that would prevent it from coming off you if you were
Yeah,
to go in the water.
that's interesting. I guess I also, what do they, I know that they have like infant flotation devices now, and they're more just like floatable kind of like bassinets, I guess. They didn't have any provisos for babies.
It would on the ship on Titanic. No,
Yeah,
this I don't
hold
believe
on
there was
tight.
any other. Yeah,
Gosh,
hold.
hold man. It's just
Just hold on.
it's just it's weird to think about how different and yet how the same things still are. It's like, yeah, we still wear life belts um on boats and on ships now, but we have now figured out that perhaps we should have different sizes.
On the cruise ship, there's two sizes.
Hmm.
There's smaller ones for younger kids. There may even be an infant one. I haven't. We did take him. I think you have to be 6 months old at least to
Okay.
go on a carnival cruise. So, um, yeah, I'll have to look into that, see if they have an infant one, because I know they have a kids one.
I think that like I think it's less of a life vest and more of just like a floating basket type deal. Because I mean it's for babies
It
in
would have to be because
yeah.
the modern cruise ship ones, they just go around your neck. They're about
Hmm.
just keeping your head above the water.
Hmm.
It doesn't go. There's nothing on your back.
Oh, it's been a long time
It's
since
just
I've
in the
been on a
front.
cruise then. Kind of like the
Yeah,
airplane ones, airline ones, kind of like
yeah.
around your neck and in the chest.
It gets you floating on your back
Okay, makes sense.
and your head above the water.
Right. Well, I think we're now learning that that is the safe position. You know, the Titanic lifebelts had the same amount of cork on the front and the back, and that
Yeah.
was about keeping you vertically upright, which is, as I just said, like now we know that's not the optimal position for, especially
Mhm.
once you're exhausted in the water. It's I've never been a lifeguard, so I don't have any lifeguard safety training officially. But I remember when I was teaching swimming, that was kind of one of those things that like when someone is drowning or when someone is panicking, when someone is exhausted, whatever the case may be, and they are in peril in the water, is to have them on their backs. It's the easiest way for them to float, for them to breathe, and it's the
Mhm.
least amount of energy they'll exert to keep themselves in a somewhat safe position.
I can't float.
I'm not great at floating either. I have to constantly be moving
I
my
sink.
arms. Yeah, I'm a sinker. It was always, oh, I hated whenever there was like, Miss Alex, can you demonstrate a float? Not really. Sorry.
In the Marines, we had swim qual, and you'd have to take your blouse and fill it with air and try to float on your back
That's okay.
with a rifle and pack and
That's all right.
boots. And
Jesus. Do you then have to also do like a tread water test
hmm
in full
oh yeah,
gear? How long is that
yeah,
for?
more than a few minutes.
Good Lord.
It's been a long time.
I mean, I'm because I again like I don't have any weird like training or anything, but you know, part of the swim assessments is you had to like tread water for a minute, one singular. Granted, I was also only probably 12 at the time, so I was younger. But you know, a minute's quite a long time when you think about it,
Yes.
especially to do something. It's like when I first started doing roller derby many, many years ago, they've eliminated this as a trial now, but you used to be able, nope, you used to have to be able to skate 27 laps in 5 minutes, which I never really thought about it. And when someone was like 27 laps, 5 minutes at first, I was like, oh, that's no big deal. Number one, I was wrong. Number two, it is a big deal. And again, number three, 5 minutes doesn't seem like a long time, but when you're moving for those 5 minutes continuously,
hmm
it's an extremely difficult task. And then you're underwater with a rifle and boots and your full kit, kicking around.
Yeah, I've never rollerblade. I not that coordinated.
Weirdly enough, I'm
I
not
looked
that
it.
either. Oh, you looked what up?
I looked it up. So for the Marine Corps swim call, you jump off a raised platform in full gear, keep their head above water for 4 minutes, and swim 25 meters with the full gear. So yeah, that's what we did in boot camp, and
Technicality
you
question
had
for
to do
you.
it every year.
Ew. This wasn't a one and done.
No.
Boo. Do you, this is a technicality question. When you jump in, because it's a raised platform, can your head submerge for the initial plunge?
Oh yeah.
I was
Yeah,
gonna
I know
say,
how to go
okay.
underwater.
Okay, because they said you can't let your head go underwater. It's like, that's a hard one.
Well, once you
Oh,
once you come
okay.
back up and you're treading water, you can't like be underwater for
I
part
was
of your. You can't
okay.
just swim backwards underwater and hold your breath.
I was being way too literal. Okay, I see. Either way, it's still hard. Jeez.
But after World War II,
Hmm.
there were many Marines drowned. You know, coming up on the beach, they had to
Really?
bail out of um, those vehicles that take you to the beach, and they couldn't swim. So
Oh,
that's when they incorporated swimming into Marine Corps training.
I find that surprising that it was that recent. That's really surprising to me. I mean, because I'm thinking, I think especially in, Western countries, swimming is much more of a common thing now. Like almost everyone I know learns to swim at some point, even if you don't swim again in your adult life. I think almost everyone I know remembers at some point in childhood even learning how to swim. But, many, not even that many years ago, I mean, in the 60s even, not everyone, this wasn't necessarily normal. And, you go even farther back to Titanic times, like especially for women, you wouldn't know how to swim. That it
Yeah,
just,
it has to be taught.
yeah, it definitely does. And it wasn't part of the like normal culture to be like, all right, girls, you're 7 years old now, time to get your wetsuits and go to the pool. It wasn't how you did things. And I think a lot of men didn't really know how to swim either.
I'm not too familiar with the swimming habits.
Me neither. I'm just
It was
thinking,
probably not something that you would have, maybe in the United States,
mhm,
but in Europe, the weather is not the best to
that's fair.
just go to the beach.
Well, I was thinking about clothing drag, like you were saying with your, all your wearing your full kit when you jump in. These people on Titanic were wearing full dresses and suits and wool coats. Absolutely nothing conducive for floating.
I mean, if you were to get wet, then it's over. It's
Mm.
just from almost all of them. Just if you get wet and you lose heat and you get hypothermia.
Well, that's what they say that most people ended up dying from was like not the drowning. Well, some of probably
Yeah.
injuries, but not the hypothermia. It was cold. And you're saying that the lifeboat belts are warm, but they're not that warm.
No, they're not going to keep you warm in the water. But they do keep you warm if you
Hmm.
just wear them for extended period of time.
Yeah, I mean they're insulated as you said, but they don't really they don't generate heat.
No, no, not at all.
No, I don't know. I find these life belts fascinating because, as I said, look, when I first saw one in person, it's like I just didn't. That's all people had.
Yeah, it's something that there's so few of them,
Yeah.
and it's something that came from the ship, and each one has a personal story, or at least those two or four that can be traced back to
Mhm.
actual individuals. So, I'd like people to be able to, you know, get their hands on the closest thing possible to what people had at the time.
How long does it take you to make a life belt from start? Now that you've kind of got your process down, like I'm sure when you were figuring out it
Um,
was much harder.
oh yeah, it would take pretty much all day to make one, but I've gotten more efficient. Right now, the longest it's a hobby still,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I do. If I've added up all the time, it'd probably be about 5 hours for each one. Because I have to, cut the cork, measure and cut the cork, and then, measure, cut the fabric, and then sew up all the fabric. And then hand sewing actually takes the longest. I
I bet.
continuous. It's about 20 minutes each run, and there's 4 runs on there.
Wow. Yeah, it seems like a labor of love, if you will. They look
Uh,
really nice
I
though.
used to. No, thank you. They yeah, when I hand sew it, every single, if I put the needle in and it's too far over or too
Mhm.
close, then I pull it out and I, start again. And once I run the needle through, it's doubled up, so I can't
Mhm.
just back it back out.
Yeah,
I've
it'll
committed
leave.
to
Mhm.
leave a pretty large gap, and then it just doesn't look right. There's about two I couldn't like see myself selling to anyone. I just tore them apart, restarted over again.
I
So
mean, it's one of the hard parts for I think some people to understand about artistic pursuits is that when if you make something and it's not up to your standards, even though I'm sure, like I'm thinking in the back of my brain, like I'm sure that those life belts were fine. Like I'm betting you if the ones that you thought was awful, if you'd gifted it to me, I probably would have been absolutely ecstatic and wouldn't have noticed it. But it's the same thing where it's like, well, I noticed, like I when I was making it, I tore a big hole in that thing and I can still see it.
yeah, I was looking at one and I'm like, no, 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 can't. That's not going to work. So I do everything from start to finish.
That's
Nobody
awesome.
else helps me with it because my wife is like, oh, I can sew a little bit, and I'm like, that's really nice of you to offer. I'd hate to be like you're done and be like, oh, this is awesome, thank you. I can't sell this one. I can't ship this to anyone.
That's hard though. I mean, when you have a process, even if it's not something like a recreation where things need to be exact. But if you have a process, even if someone means the best and they're very skilled and they're very kind and they love you and you love them, if it's not done the way that you want it or need it, it just doesn't work out properly. And it's not to
Mhm.
impugn on anyone's skills, but especially it's something like this where you Leto, there's nothing there. What's amazing about them barking is that they can't see outside. They can't see outside, so I don't know what this fuss is about. But anyway, but what I'm trying to say is that when you have a process in place, and especially like you have when you've researched and you know so much and you are so dedicated to your craft, it is difficult to try to involve other people because you know how you want it to turn out and you know where everything needs to go and how it needs to be. And you in your own mind, probably before you put a needle through, you can sometimes look at it and go, that's going to be in the wrong place, and just instinctively move it over because you know by now.
Yeah, and I it's very hard to get the fabric to meet up in the direct center on the side of the belt.
I believe that.
So if the cork is cut wrong, which it's not, I'm not going to cut cork wrong, but I do fold it over and iron it
Hmm.
beforehand just to kind of get that nice crease that,
Yeah.
sometimes they don't meet up tight. So you have to make some like minor adjustments on the fly. And
Hmm.
I do have set measurements I use. Sometimes I'll kind of veer off a little bit, but it all looks the same at the very
Hmm.
end. You can't just, stamp the design on fabric and then just run it through. Everything's intentional. Everything's
Hmm.
hand folded and hand pressed and intentionally done. I'm sure
Yeah.
I'm actually when I'm doing it, I'm trying to think like how did the people in the phosphorus factory create these? Like, are they doing them the exact same way I am? Because I feel like this is exactly how they would be doing it, much
Hmm.
faster. They probably wouldn't be making as many measurements as I am.
I mean, who
Make
knows?
3,500 of these for each ship.
Seriously,
That that's a lot of life belts.
it's like when
And
I watch.
surprisingly, they're
It's like so.
all very different.
Yeah.
Not very different, but
Well, because they're all
they all have
handmade, right?
differences. Yeah, they're all handmade.
Hmm.
So one life belt will might have different dimensions than another one,
Right.
just slightly.
Yeah.
And even the stamps, they're different.
Hmm.
Some on Ann Astor's life belt, the stamps look different than the Duff Gordon life belt.
Hmm.
And the Francis Helly life belt, they're different than the Blackmar life belt.
Hmm.
So, more than one person was making these.
Yeah.
So everybody has their own style.
Hmm.
They're told how to do it, but they're going to look a little different.
Yeah.
There's going to be different types of stamps used because they didn't use one stamp 3,500 times
Right.
in one person. So there's going to be some differences between each one, and I think that's expected.
Yeah, it's like I like to sew. I'm getting more into trying to sew my own clothes just for fun. But, when you hand make something, even if you're as deliberate as possible, you lay the pattern out just right, you draw the line exactly right, you measure it all up. And so there's still going to be variances no matter how careful you are. There's going to be differences because it was made by hand.
Now, 1/16th of an inch difference will have a ripple effect and make
For,
it look very different.
yes, yes, it will. And if you follow the wrong stitch line, you won't make shorts so much as you'll make the weirdest concoction you've ever seen. It took me like 10 minutes to figure out how to undo it because I could not figure out what I had sewn. I was like, how did this happen? I fixed it, but still.
And before this, the only time I've sewn was in middle school. So I, so I, that's why my wife jokes, you woke up one day and decided to make life belts. So I had her aunt's old sewing machine. I threaded it. I had to make about five before I was like, I think people would like these.
That's amazing. It's always cool to hear the stories of people who are like, I'm a fourth generation seamstress. My mom sewed, my grandmother. So that's always cool. But it is equally fun to me when someone's like, yeah, I was just walking home one day and I saw a needle felting kit. So I bought it and now I make needle felted pigs. You're like, what? How did that happen? But congrats to you.
Let's see. Yes, some people ask me how many I've made so far, and usually my answer is enough to fill a lifeboat. So
Whose lifeboat?
who's a standard lifeboat.
Okay, because I was gonna say because it was the Duff
Not
Gordon
the first.
lifeboat.
Yeah, no, that I made 12. No, it was way more than 12.
I had a feeling it has to be more than 12. I just wanted to rib you for a second. That's amazing. When did you I meant to ask this. When did you like when besides the five that you were saying, but when did you actually make the first one that you were like, this is I've got something here?
It was back in August,
Just of
and
last
it
year?
was, no,
That's incredible. I didn't realize you'd only been doing for some reason I thought you'd been doing this for a few years now.
no. There's some other people that made some life belts. I don't know if
Maybe.
they weren't when I first started making them. Nobody was selling any others that I knew
That's fair.
of,
Wow, this was just from
and
August?
mhm,
Wow. Sorry, I'm like
yeah,
stuck on this fact.
yeah. When I start something, it's very intentional and deliberate, and I,
I
I
like
get
it.
very focused.
I kind of did something. I had a little bit more of lead time into it, but I did sort of similarly start this podcast. So I
Hmm.
get that. But sewing, I will say, one of the last notes I'm going to make is for anyone who's thinking about it. Sewing is an amazing hobby, but it's expensive. Sewing is an expensive hobby. Like, how did you justify that at the beginning? Because like I know that for me personally, like just this is just me speaking, Alexia speaking for Alexia, and like I sometimes can't afford to do sewing projects just because the amount of fabric that I'm going to need to do whatever. I have a thing for circle skirts, which take up a lot of fabric. They're very large, but it sometimes means that I kind of have to like budget for it because I'm like, all right, it's going to cost X amount of dollars just to get the fabric I need.
Yeah, actually the biggest expense was the cork.
That I could see that.
So and then really the time,
Mm,
fabric could be expensive. I funded everything, myself, and I'm not running like into debt making these or anything. They're still just a hobby. So, if when I sell one, I use whatever, I sell it for, I use that to purchase more materials to sell more. It's still worth my time to make.
yeah.
And I try to make more than I need at the time. I don't stamp them until, somebody, sometimes I'll stamp one or two, but
Mm-hmm.
if I'm running low on like cork and I can't unstamp a life belt, and if somebody doesn't want a stamped one, um, then yeah, I'll have to just make a new one. And, like the first person who ordered one in from the UK, minor changes can still be made. if somebody needs longer straps, I can definitely make longer straps. If they don't care that, they're a set length, I can make them longer.
What about a pink life belt?
I can make any color, any
I,
color that they sell in like canvas.
my favorite color
If
is
somebody
pink.
wanted, if somebody wanted a pink life belt, I could definitely sell a pink life belt. I'll get the thread to match the best I can.
Would I stop getting invited to Titanic events? Yes or no? Unclear. Listeners, write it. Weigh in on a pink life belt. I don't. I mean, I'm halfway joking, but I think it's really, really cool to see these life belts in person. Because, as I said, I was really fortunate to see Madeline's in person,
Mhm.
but that was just like a chance experience that I didn't think I
I
was going to
know,
have.
and now I'm wishing I really went. When I saw all those pictures, I'm like, oh,
You should come
why
this
not
year.
go?
I don't know if there's going to be life belts this year, but it's going to be in Vegas with the big piece.
Yeah, that's in April, right?
I think it's still in August.
Okay,
Well,
I'll have
the
to look that up.
anniversary
I'm
may
in the
be in
group.
April. I'm in the group and I check it sometimes. Um, oh, I think it's in August. And I know this because I remember asking the tentative dates last year and kind of like booking them just so that I had them in my calendar. And it's going to be in August, but I think that maybe you're right, and that maybe the anniversary of it is in April. I'm not 100% sure. I'm terrible with dates.
It felt like there was a more meetings this year than like there was
Maybe.
last year.
I only found out about the one in August about a month before it was happening. Because LA Beatles from the Unsinkable podcast, she ended up going and she was like, "Did you know about this thing?" It's like, as a matter of fact, I did not. So that was the first I'd ever heard of any kind of meetups or anything. But it was really fun. You should, if you're able to, obviously, nobody do anything weird to get yourself there. But if you're able to, it'd be really fun to have. I'm sure people would love to grill you more about your life belts.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, Vegas. I've been there once before by myself.
It's
It's kind of
fine.
hard when I I do have a full-time job,
Yeah. Yeah,
so
that was yeah, I had to take the time off to go to the thing, and that was part of it. And so that's why it's like I get that not everyone's able to, but this year I do think with it being the celebration of the raising, the big piece, and everything, it should be a reasonably good time. Excuse me.
yeah, I went to the one in Orlando, and that
Ooh,
had the big piece, I think, at the time.
that's cool.
So
Yeah, it's in Vegas now, and I think it has been for quite some time. I guess it lives there now, which is fine. I suppose if I had to take up residency somewhere, Vegas isn't the worst place.
yeah, I think Orlando last time we went there 11 years ago.
Yeah, I think last time I was
So
in Universal was like 7 years ago. It's been a long time. It's been a hot minute, but I mean, I like that there are more exhibits now, and because it makes it more accessible for people. Because back when it was only in Pigeon Forge and Branson, how many people really fortunate enough to be able to make it out to those places?
yeah, and then there's the traveling one. My brother wore his life belt. I gave him to
Nice,
that one.
that's
And
awesome.
the only comment he got was, "Oh, you came prepared." So
I mean, he did.
everybody else is walking around with the earpieces on and just listening to the stories and everything like that. There wasn't very many. Other than that, there wasn't any other interaction with them.
It's interesting because last time I was at the Pigeon Forge Museum was just before the holidays, and I ran through like a bat out of hell because I was in the process of moving to Texas, and my mom was watching my dog while I run through the museum because I wanted to look at the movie costumes. But I was struck by how many, not in it, but just how many families there were, and how interested the kids were. Is my assumption a lot of the times is that when I see children in a museum, that their parents have brought them to the museum and that they're not happy to
Hmm.
be there. Um, but a lot of the kids were really, really interested. Like, mom, look at this. Did you know? Did you know? They were really interested. It was kind of cool.
Yeah, they're drawn in from the giant ship on the outside. It
It's pretty
sparks their
cool.
interest.
Yeah, it was really neat to see, and it was also neat because I could tell that a lot of the kids who were there, maybe they were the older ones, like 8 plus, were there because they were interested in Titanic. Like some of the littler ones, just there. But some of the kids, they seemed to be there because they were interested, and I thought that was really, really neat. And I bet they would have gotten an absolute lark out of your out of your life belts.
Yeah, I'm glad that they allow you to take pictures now.
Yeah, yeah,
It just started in around April. That's right when they announced that. That's where like, oh yeah, we should definitely go now because we went when you couldn't take pictures and there was just no memories of being there except for the ship on the outside. So
yeah. I mean, granted, pictures don't make or break it, but it is nice to be able to have it, especially something like the grand staircase where they recreate it so beautifully. It looks so
mhm.
lovely and the colors are warm and rich. It's like you want to be able to take a picture and show somebody because it's cool.
Oh yeah, and it'll bring more people in. They see this and they're like, oh, we have to go there.
It is cool. It is definitely.
See for ourselves that the pictures don't really do it justice.
They really don't. And I mean, I know that sounds cliche, but it is really cool. When you get to walk down it, you can look at the banisters and see the gold and the black and take a
Mhm.
real look at the bronze boy and at the clock and the woodwork. It's very cool. It's very neat. And I'm a very tactile learner. I mean, as I've talked about it, like poking at Master's Lifebelt, like I learn by in that way. So for someone like me, it is impressive, and having the picture, it's obviously it's not quite the same the experience, but it is nice to show people to be like, no, 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 it's really cool.
Yeah,
Um,
I heard they don't take it out very often, and that was a very special treat for the group that came.
they don't what?
The life belt. They don't take that life belt out very often.
No, for
Um,
anyone who's wondering, at the convention, one of the people that's I think a curator and works with the museum brought as like a special treat Madeline's
mhm.
life belt, and they were actually showing us specifically how they display and mount it, which is why we got to take a better look at the display mechanism they'd rigged up. So that's why the whole thing was there. It was really cool to look at, but hopefully one day you get to see it in person. I think that would be very, very cool.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely want to check that out.
Yeah,
Hopefully they bring it back out again.
hope so.
I'm also collaborating with Judith Yates. Have you seen her game? It's Survived the Titanic board game.
I didn't know, but I need to talk to her immediately. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's a card game of the survivors, and it gives you all this history and facts behind each one, and then
Uh-huh.
it's a game in the way it's interactive, and you can
Hmm.
learn about the survivors throughout
Sure.
the game. So right now it's on Kickstarter. It met the goal actually,
Nice.
and with 7 days
Congrats.
left. So I'm giving life belts to the $200 pledges up to four,
Awesome.
and they get a copy of the game. So they get a life belt, a copy of the game for $200 pledge, and there's
That's
some
pretty good.
shipping. But
That's
yeah,
amazing. What's it? What's
so
it? What's the game called for people if they want to look it up? I don't know if it'll be out. This episode will be out in time for the Kickstarter. I actually don't think that it
yeah.
will. But for people who want to look up the game,
Oh, it's called Survive the Titanic board game
okay. I mean, I'm sure the Kickstarter page will
or a
still be
card
active.
game.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. Since I'm at its goal, they're not gonna do another one.
No, no, no. But I
But
mean, like, if you Google it, the page should come up, and that'll have like all the info and
yeah.
stuff. I
Oh
think.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, Steve, thank you so much for letting me
Oh, you're welcome.
absolutely grill you in a completely disorganized fashion.
Well, thank you for having me
Thank
on.
you
This is
so
my
much.
first interview, so
Really? I hope you do a lot
yeah.
more.
I know. I like talking about them, and I like the history behind each one.
Oh yeah, you should definitely get and talk to more people. This has been really interesting, and I like I said, as a tactile learner, I really like the ability to be able to see these recreations. You can learn so much.
Hmm.
So, well, thank you again, Steve, so much for coming on.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Steve and Titanic Lifebelts for coming on to talk about this. Because, yeah, as we went over, I didn't really have any idea what went into it then and what goes into it now, and you should definitely follow him on all of his social media pages to see more about his creative process and to buy his life belts. You can find him on Facebook and Instagram. He has the same username, that is Titanic Lifebelts, all one word, TitanicLifebelts. And you can find him on his website, which is TitanicLifebelts.com. You can also find him on Etsy. That's Etsy.com/shop. Nope. Etsy.com/shop/. Titanic Lifebelts, all one word. My gosh. Etsy.com/shop/Titanic Lifebelts. That is all one word. His username on Instagram and Facebook and Etsy. And you can talk to him at any time in those places and learn more about lifebelts, which I think everybody should. Thanks again, Steve, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.